Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis, and today we're talking about the Monkees again. I've done a few videos about the Monkees, and every time I'm talking about the Monkees' music, I always, stop myself from getting sidetracked talking about the story of the Monkees, what went into the development of the series, what went into recording, and all of that stuff. Even though I think it's fascinating stuff, I've avoided getting into it because that is a tangent that can completely derail a discussion of the relative qualities of their albums. But hey, today we are taking that tangent. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the history of the Monkees. I call this Monkees 101. My intended audience here is people who are familiar with the Monkees because they know a bunch of the songs and they've seen the TV show, but they may not necessarily know all of the ins and outs of monkey lore. If you do know that monkey lore, then what you're going to get from this is mostly my take on the events as they unfold. Keep in mind as we take this journey, I am not a musicologist and I'm not a historian. This is not a scholarly work. This is a reasonably well-informed fan's take on the events that were the Monkees, the events that were the career of the Monkees. That was an awkward sentence, but you know what I mean. You ready? Let's get started. So where does it all begin? I think you can make a good argument that it begins in the 30s. 1933, more precisely. In February 1933, Bob Rafelson is born. In May, Bert Schneider is born. So you've got these two guys who came up with the idea, who shepherded the project throughout. Both born in 1933, so there's a good argument there. 1934, in April, Don Kirshner was born, who was responsible for the music here. So got a good argument that says that the Monkees began in the 30s. You've got a good argument that says that the Monkees began in the 40s. 1942, Peter is born in February, Mike in December. 1945, Mickey is born in March, and Davy in December. So we've got an argument that the 40s are when the Monkees started. I would argue that the Monkees proper, began in 1964. There were two important things that happened in 1964. First, in May of 1964, Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider formed Raybert Productions. Ray for Rafelson, Bert for Bert Schneider. Yeah, clever. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider were both bright young television executives. They both had Ivy educations. Bob went to Dartmouth. Bert went to Cornell. And they were working as cogs in the entertainment machine at Screen Gems, which was the television making subsidiary of Columbia Pictures at the time. And they, met, talked with one another and realized that they both had a dream. They had a dream. They wanted to make movies. They wanted to make good movies, real movies. They wanted to explore the human condition in cinema. And they wanted to make their mark as movie makers. Specifically, Rafelson wanted to direct and Schneider wanted to produce. But they wanted to make movies. And so they formed Raybert Productions so that they could eventually make movies. But they also thought, we work in television. All of our contacts are in television. We probably ought to start with TV. It might be easier for us to get a TV show made. And so they decided to start with TV. Bob Rafelson had this idea kicking around in the back of his head for quite some time about a sitcom centered on the lives of the members of a pop band. He has said in several interviews that this was an idea he came up with based on his own experiences as a young man playing in a pop band, and he thought it would be an entertaining show. But in 1964, the second of these two important events happened. in August of 1964, a movie was released. A Hard Day's Night, starring the Beatles. The Beatles had hit America at this point, right? I mean, they'd been on the Ed Sullivan Show way back in, I want to say February. I might be wrong about that, but I think it was February of '64. Beatlemania had swept across the country like wildfire. Pop music was hot. Pop music performed by people with British accents was even hotter. Ooh, if you wanted to form a pop band and you just happened to know somebody who spoke with a British accent, boom, get him in the band. Pop was big. Pop stars were big. There was just an explosion of interest in this stuff. But Hard Day's Night demonstrated how well comedy and pop music work together, which is something we've always known. I mean, you go back to the Marx Brothers, comedy and music blended very well there. But Hard Day's Night showed that if you had a group of guys who were good musicians, who all were photogenic and all had nice personalities, if they all had comic timing, you could make a really good product. And Hard Day's Night is a really good movie. It's not just a good movie for the Beatles. It's not just a good movie in terms of the music that it's in it. It is a very good comedy. It's a really good movie. And so the success of Hard Day's Night, Rafelson may have had the idea for this TV show, but without Hard Day's Night to prove that something like that could work and could really work well, I don't know that Rafelson ever would have managed to talk somebody into making his TV show. But you put those two things together, Raybert forms, Hard Day's Night hits, boom! We are now ready for some Monkees, which means we have to find our Monkees. The original idea was that they were going to get an existing band and build the sitcom around that band. The Lovin' Spoonful is the choice that everybody knows about. I think I've read somewhere that they also considered the Dave Clark Five, but I know that they were considering the Lovin' Spoonful. The problem with this was that the Beatles were lightning in a bottle. Okay, I mean, the Beatles were good musicians, good songwriters. They had good personalities, but they also had good comic timing, and they all had it. It wasn't just one or two people. And finding a band that had that level of talent evenly distributed was going to be a nightmare. And so the idea of wrapping it around a band was quickly shelved, and they decided instead to cast their own band. Because if we're casting our own people, then we can have that even distribution of comedic ability, and then we'll figure out. We'll get over that music hurdle when we get to it. We'll cast these people in the band, and we'll hire somebody else to take care of the music for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Enter Don Kirshner. Donnie Kirshner, the man with the golden ear, or the man with the taste of a 12-year-old girl, depending on whom you ask. Don Kirshner was the man. He was in charge of music at Screen Gems. He was in High Mucky Muck in their in Cole Picks, which was the record label that Columbia Pictures had. He had all of the top songwriters under contract. He was their publisher, right? So he had Neil Diamond, he had Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, he had Jerry Goffin and Carole King, he had Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil, he had producers under contract, he had Boyce and Hart, he had Jeff Barry and Jack Keller and Neil Sedaka. I mean, he had all of these people under contract. So if you needed somebody to generate music, you'd go to Don Kirshner because he had it. And this decision, okay, we're going to cast the members of our band, and we're going to let Don handle the music. This decision ended up creating two silos. We've got the TV show and we've got the music. We've got Raybert and Kirshner. And Raybert, all of their decisions that they make, everything that they do has to do with the quality of the TV show. They don't give a shit about the music. They're focused on the TV show. Kirshner and all the decisions he makes is focused on the music. He doesn't give a shit about the TV show. He wants the music to be as good as possible, right? So you've got these two silos. They're independent of each other. And each one is largely dismissive of the other, right? So we've got this. I don't want to use a term loosely here, but we've got this kind of bipolar condition here. We've got these two silos that don't really interact. Which is going to lead us to problems here in a little bit. So we're going to set the music silo off to the side for now. Let's talk about Raybert. Raybert, they're the ones who are responsible for finding the Monkees, right? So they are looking for their Monkees. First Monkee was easy to find. Screen Gems at the time had recently signed a contract with a bright, young, promising young actor and singer from England, a young man by the name of Davy Jones, who had made something of a splash on Broadway. And as soon as he made that splash, then he signed a contract with Columbia Pictures that also involved Screen Gems for TV, Columbia Pictures for movies, Screen Gems for TV, Colpix for music. They're all owned by the same company, Columbia Pictures. And Davy Jones was perfect for this. I mean, he's the right age. He's got a British accent. Boom. He's cute. Okay, boxes just being checked left and right. Davy Jones, he's obvious. Boom. He's our first Monkee. We're going out. We're looking for other Monkees. Now, this is normally the point in a history like this when we're talking about Monkee lore. This is the point where we talk about the Madness ad. Ooh, madness. We're looking for Ben Franks types. Must come down for interview. Ooh, we love talking about how clever this ad is and how different this ad was. It appeared in Daily Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. And the ad is a non-issue. It's something that I think a lot of people talk about because Raybert liked talking about it. And Raybert liked talking about it because it made them look cool. I think the ad could just as easily have said, wanted, young men to star in TV show. Must have musical ability. Boom. That would have had exactly the same impact, right? Nobody was looking at this ad and thinking, ooh, that ad has caught my eye. I think I'll go out for that one. I'm not applying for any of these other jobs. I just want the madness one. Yeah, no. And that's even setting aside the fact that only one of our Monkees was reached. That's the word I want. By the ad. Mike Nesmith was the only Monkee who answered the ad. So we're not going to talk about the ad. We're going to talk about the, we do need to talk very quickly. Mike answered the ad. Mickey, because he was an established actor, had a private audition that was arranged by his agent, his management team. He didn't go through the cattle call process. Peter went through the cattle call process, but he didn't do it in response to the ad. Peter did it because he was buddies with Stephen Stills, and Stephen Stills had met Rafelson, and Rafelson was telling Stills about this project that he was working on, that he was looking for musicians and singers to try out for this thing. And when Stephen Stills expressed interest in doing it, Rafelson said, well, yeah, you love to have you, but you're already going bald and your teeth are crooked. So do you know anybody who has better hair and better teeth? And Stephen Stills thought about Peter Tork because Stephen and Peter had been buddies for quite some time at this point, and Peter was Stephen Stills with better hair and better teeth. So that's how Peter got attached to it. During the audition process, what happened was they had the offices there at Raybert There were two private offices, one for Ray, one for Bert, right? Rafelson and Schneider had their own offices. And then there was a reception area out front. The reception area is just full of guys. Each guy takes a number. And as soon as either Rafelson or Schneider, whoever's free at the moment, okay, I'm free, the next, whoever's number is next goes and meets with that person. So let's say that I'm going in and I meet with Bert Schneider, and Bert Schneider likes me. He thinks I might work. Then he sends me over so I meet with Bob Rafelson. If Bob Rafelson likes me and thinks I might work, then the two of them send me off down to one of the sitcom sets where they've got some cameras set up. They take my picture. They film a little bit just to make sure that I look good on the camera. And if I get through that little, is he photogenic, is he telegenic test, then I go back into the board, and we've got the board set up with all of the people that we're thinking about. We eventually narrow that down to about 8 guys that they bring in for the actual screen tests. They're paired up to do scenes together, and from those 8 or so guys, the final 4 Monkees, Davy, Mickey, Mike, and Peter, are picked. They knew Raybert knew going in that there were certain archetypes that they wanted. They needed to have one that was the cute one, right? They all had to be good looking, but one of them had to be especially cute. They needed one to be the clown. They needed one to be the leader. They needed one to be the oddball, right? We got to have these archetypes so that the stories are going to work. They also knew that they wanted a diverse, by early 60s television standards, selection of guys. They wanted to check off as many boxes as they could. They wanted somebody to have a good sarcastic sense of humor. They wanted somebody who was good with physical comedy, this kind of stuff. They didn't necessarily have to line up. They didn't go into it looking for a lanky, sarcastic Texan who will be the strong and silent leader of the band, right? It's not like they didn't have it set quite that firmly, but they had this list of qualifications, of qualities that they were looking for that the group as a whole had to have. And as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the things that made the Monkees the big success that they were. They knew going in that they wanted a variety of guys, right? They wanted to have, the goal here is that no matter what 12-year-old girl we're talking about, she's going to be able to look at these 4 guys, and she's going to be able to pick one of these 4 guys to be her idol. One of these 4 guys is going to be pinned up on her wall, right? We know going into it that most of them are going to pick Davy because Davy's the cute one. But there are going to be some girls who just don't like Davy as much. They like, right? And so we needed to have that kind of diversity. And they also, though, went with musical diversity. We've got 4 very different guys in these Monkees. We've got Davy, who is Broadway musical theater show tunes. We've got Mickey, who is old school rock and roll, Southern California. We've got Mike, who is Texas, Southern drawl, likes country music. We've got Peter, who is Northeastern folk music, right? We've got such a variety of musical styles that these 4 guys are conversant in that we can do anything. We can do anything on these albums. We can do anything. We can have any song. We can do anything. Huge strength going in. It's not like they're all 4, which is the problem that you've got if you bring in a band like the Lovin' Spoonful. You're not going to have that kind of diversity. So that's one of the things that makes that pretty much guaranteed going into it that the Monkees were going to be successful, I think. But now that we've got our Monkees, now that we've picked our 4 Monkees, we have to work them into shape. It's not enough that we've cast these fellas as the Monkees. They have to be house trained. We got to train these guys. As soon as the Monkees were selected, they were put into a fairly extensive boot camp. They worked on their improvisational comedy skills with Jim Frawley, who was going to be directing most. It turned out he directed most of the episodes of the series. He didn't have an extensive history as a director, but he did have an extensive background in improvisational comedy, and so he taught the Monkees how to be an improvisational comedy troupe. They worked on physical comedy and that sort of stuff. They also worked on their music skills, musician skills. They worked on how to act like a band, which mostly meant they had to teach Mickey how to play the drums. Coming into the project, they all had musical ability of some sort. Mike was struggling as a singer-songwriter. Peter was a folk musician. Was a very talented musician on a number of instruments. Mike played the guitar passably well. Mickey was a guitarist and singer for a covers band, and was a decent guitar player. Not an excellent guitar player, but he could play rhythm guitar, and he sang very well. Davey was actually a pretty good drummer when they started. As far as raw talent went, of the four, Davey should have been the drummer, but it made sense. You didn't want to put Davey behind the drum kit because he was going to be the cute one, and you want the cute one out front. You don't want him sitting behind a drum kit. Didn't help that he was also as short as he was, so if you put Davey behind a drum kit, he's just going to disappear. So Mickey was picked to be the drummer, and that meant he had to learn how to play the drums. Once they were trained up and they were ready to start filming the pilot, November 1965, they started filming the pilot. It was filmed very quickly in San Diego and Los Angeles, I believe, on a shoestring budget because they did not have much in the way of training or much in the way of funding at all. Screen Gems had agreed to support the pilot, but they weren't paying a lot of money for it. So they make the pilot, it's done, they take it in and they test it with a sample audience, and oh man, did it bomb. Oh, it got really low ratings from that sample audience. Bob Rafelson has said multiple times in interviews that what he noticed when they were listening to the focus group talking about the pilot, what he noticed was that they didn't know which monkey was which. They were saying Mickey when they meant Peter, and they were saying Mike when they meant Davey, that kind of thing. And so he thought, well, what we'll do is we'll put some clips from their screen tests at the beginning and then recut the pilot to shrink it down a little bit so that we keep it in the same general time frame, and that way they will get to know the Monkees before they watch the story. And it worked. The revised, the re-edited pilot got very high ratings among the focus group that watched it. It was high enough that NBC didn't just okay the series, they okayed 2 seasons. They bought 2 seasons up front. Now, here's what I think is probably more the case. I'm not saying that Rafelson's wrong. I'm saying that Rafelson is giving himself credit for being this master visionary that, no. What I think happened was that they had these 4 guys who were very talented guys, right? The casting process that they went through paid dividends because they ended up with 4 very good Monkees here. They're 4 very talented guys. They are all talented comedy performers. They are all talented musical performers. They've got a good cast here. They had a pilot script written by Larry Tucker and Paul Mazursky that was run of the mill. It was cookie cutter. It was generic sitcom. There was nothing special about that script. I apologize to Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker, wherever you are, but there just wasn't much to that story. Wasn't much to that plot. There wasn't, if we're being honest, much to any plot of any episode of the Monkees. What made the Monkees work wasn't the stories. What made the Monkees work was the chemistry that these individual guys had. And they didn't have that in the scripted sequences. They had it in the screen tests. So you could have played, I think, just a half hour of excerpts from the screen tests and then at the end say, would you like to see a show featuring these guys? And I think that would have scored very well. And I think he could have gotten a show that way. It was brilliant adding in the screen tests, yes. But it was brilliant not because that meant that the audience now knew which monkey was which, but rather now the audience knew who the Monkees really were and what they were capable of doing in a way that the scripted pilot just didn't do. Grain of salt on that, that's personal opinion. Now, NBC orders 2 seasons of the show. Fantastic, wonderful, woohoo! That means it's time for us to make a TV show. So it's time to make a TV show. We need scripts. We need music. We need a record company. One of the questions that often comes up is, did Columbia Pictures know going into this that the Monkees was going to be the hit that it was going to be? And I would argue, oh, of course they did. They knew just how big and just how good their marketing department was. But for me, the proof that they knew that the Monkees were going to be big was that Columbia Pictures had a record label. I mentioned it earlier, Colpix, right? Columbia Pictures, Colpix. Oh, clever. Colpix was a running label. They had several artists under contract. They had Davy Jones under contract. They had Michael Blessing, the pseudonym that the stage name that Mike Nesmith used. They had a record company set up, ready to do this, but they did not have confidence that Colpix was going to be able to handle the load that they would have if the Monkees hit it big. So one of the first things that Columbia Pictures did was they formed a new record company. They dismantled Colpix, and from its burning, smoldering ashes, they created Col Gems. Columbia Screen Gems. Oh, these guys are good. They had to know that this was going to be big if they're making a record company to distribute the records. But back to the music. We're getting ready to make this TV show, and we need a lot of music, okay? We've got the order. We know we're going to be doing 2 seasons of this. We know that we're going to need a lot of music. Excuse me. We want each episode to have 2 songs. And granted, we're going to have, some hits that we're going to use several times, but we don't want to have the same 2 songs in every episode, right? I mean, we want some variety here. We're going to have, an average TV show at that time would have somewhere in the high 20s to low 30s in terms of an episode count per season. For the Monkees, the first season had 32 episodes, for example. So if we know going into it that we're going to have, say, 30 episodes of a show, and if we know that we're going to have 2 songs per episode, then that's 60 songs. Well, okay, we're going to have some repetition, so we're going to need 45 to 50 songs. That's a lot of music to crank out quickly, because we got to have this stuff early on. Yes, a lot of the songs are going to be featured in such a way that you could put any song in there. It's going to be the song that plays while we've got this like silent movie comedy scene going, the romp that each episode had. But a lot of these are going to be performed. We're going to have our characters performing in a coffee shop. We're going to have our characters performing in their beach house. We're going to have our characters actually performing these songs on camera. So we need to have them early enough so that when we film them, we know what the hell we're doing, right? So we got to have a lot of songs, and we got to have them now. They needed a lot of music here, and that's where Don Kirshner comes in. Don sent his Flying Monkees out to record a bunch of music. Now, Don Kirshner had a bunch of producers under contract for him. He's got Boyce and Hart producing music. He's got Jack Keller producing music. He's got Jeff Barry producing music, right? And he had enough of these guys that he could separate them out. He could have, Boyce and Hart over in Studio A working on some tracks, and he could send Jeff Barry over to Studio B working on some tracks. He could send Michael Nesmith off to Studio C to work on some tracks. Michael Nesmith produced from the get-go. When Screen Gems signed Mike to his contract, because he was already a songwriter, because he had already been writing songs, they signed him to a publishing contract as well, so that they could use his songs as part of the Monkees project, because they knew they were going to need a lot of songs, right? And Mike used that during the negotiations to his advantage, and ended up getting it worked into his contract that he got to produce his own songs. So from the first album, Mike was producing. But you've got Boyce and Hart producing, you've got Mike producing at the same time, right? So that you are cranking this stuff out. All of the producers had to work to the same brief. They had to record radio-friendly pop tunes, and they must not, under any circumstances, allow any of the Monkees near an instrument. We've got silos, right? We've got the TV show, and we've got the music, and we are not crossing these streams. The only thing that Kirshner wants the Monkees to do is come in at the end of the day and lay down some vocal tracks. He doesn't want them having anything to do with any of the music part, just singing. Don wants to handle all the music, which means that none of the producers were allowed to use the Monkees as musicians. Now, there is a good argument that says none of the producers really gave a shit one way or the other, and probably wouldn't have chosen to use any of the Monkees as musicians. But still, even if they wanted to, they weren't allowed to, which is why even when Mike was producing his own song, he couldn't perform on it because he couldn't use himself as a musician. Now, he did bend the rules, he did stretch the rules, and he did allow Peter to play guitar on his songs. But he was buried so far down in the mix that nobody could ever hear him, so, he got away with it. This siloed thing, the Kirshner approach here meant that we had two really important factors that were etched into this project from the beginning. Important factor number one is they are cranking out the music. They recorded a shit ton of music. The way most pop stars of the day would record is, right, if I'm Fabian, okay, I've got a producer and a arranger who have already gone into the studio with some musicians, and they've recorded all of the tracks for my next album. I go in and I just sing my vocals on top of those tracks. That album goes out. I go and I play some concerts and I go to some parties. And then sometime later in the year, I come back in and I do the same thing. And I might release 2, maybe 3 albums a year if I'm somebody like Fabian. Well, with the Monkees, they're doing the same thing. They're releasing those 2, 3 albums a year, but they are recording as if they are 3 Fabians, right? You've got Fabian number 1, Mickey. You've got Fabian number 2, Davey. You've got Fabian number 3, Mike and Peter, since each one's about half a Fabian. Which means they were recording 3 times as much stuff as everybody else was doing. And they had to do that so that they could generate the sheer quantity of music that the TV show was going to need. They recorded a buttload of music in a very short time. The second factor was that it was emphasized at every point along the way to the Monkees themselves: you guys are not a band. You guys are not part of the music. You're just here to sing. That's it. Don't give us any feedback in terms of what the music is like. We've got adults who are taking care of that, you snot-nosed punks. Just go back to your TV studio and do your lines, right? Um, the Monkees themselves, the four actors who played the Monkees, internalized through this process that they were fake, that they were pretenders, right? They're actors, so I mean, yeah, they're pretending. But Mike and Peter had started this project, had taken on this project, were interested in this project in the first place because they thought that it would allow them some freedom to, some leverage in the pursuit of their eventual goals, their career goals that were in music. They didn't want to have a long career as an actor. They wanted to have long careers as musicians and as singers and as songwriters and as producers. That's what they were going for. And when they were told in no uncertain terms from square one, no, you are a talking head, get out of the studio, that creates a certain amount of friction. Pete and Mike bristled against that friction. Davey and Mickey didn't much care. They were actors. They were in it. Yeah, I'll go wherever you want me to go. I'll sure. You want me to do this? Okay, I'll do it that way. Okay, we're done. Okay, I'm fine. Right? Davey particularly was, yeah, hey, he was happy to do whatever Kirshner wanted him to do. Mickey happy to do whatever the system wanted him to do. Peter and Mike bristled a little bit because of that friction, because of the two silos. More on that later. So, TV series underway, they're filming episodes. In an effort to promote the upcoming season, the Monkees' first single, Last Train to Clarksville, was released August 16th, 1966, a good month before the first episode of the TV series aired. The record eventually hit number one on the Billboard charts, was the sixth highest selling single of the year. So right off the bat, Columbia Pictures knew they had a hit, which fed the machine, which fed the popularity, which fed the machine, which fed the popularity, which fed the machine. And in order to keep feeding this beast, we got to keep feeding the beast. Columbia Pictures had the Monkees out doing promotional concerts pretty early in the run of the series. The first time that they did a concert, they lip-synced it. They did a lip-syncing thing. And it failed miserably. It was a titanic clusterfuck from the beginning. Because when you're standing and you're playing along to a record, if you can't hear the record, you can't really play along to it. And if you've got a room full of girls who are all screaming, "We want the Monkees! Davey, Davey, Davey!" at the top of their lungs, you can't hear the record. They couldn't lip sync because they couldn't hear it. And so after that first failure, anytime they did one of these promotional concerts, these short little concert snippets, they did them live. They performed live. They had to. That was the only way that it would look like they were actually playing something. And even then, they didn't sound all that good because they weren't. I mean, they had just started. They they hadn't been practicing together or anything like that. I mean, luckily, nobody could hear them. So. Because of all of the Davey, 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 right? Yeah, if you can't even hear yourself, then it doesn't matter. You don't have to play well. But the important thing is that from the beginning, when they were going out to do these promotional concerts, they were actually playing. They were playing the music. They were playing together, and they were learning how to play together. By the end of the year, by the end of 1966, they were a passably good garage pop band. They could play well enough to make it through their concerts, which, considering that only a year earlier they did not know one another and Mickey didn't even know how to play the drums, was, I think, an impressive accomplishment. More importantly, because Columbia Pictures had them out there doing this, they started to become a band. They're actually performing. They're actually out there standing on stage playing these songs in front of these girls. They are a band, right? They're not just playing a band on TV. They are now actually doing it in public in front of a live audience, which gives them more of a sense of what they could be doing if they had more input into the music recording part. As a band, they wanted to start playing music on the records. It was starting to irritate them that they were expected to perform this stuff live in concert, but they weren't allowed to participate when the music was being recorded. Now, it's important to note, it's not like they wanted to be in charge of everything. They did not want total control, with the possible exception here of Mike, who is a total control kind of guy. But the rest of them didn't want total control. They didn't want to have final say in anything. They didn't want to usurp any of Kirshner's power. They just wanted to play on the records. That's all they wanted to do. But Kirshner didn't want that. No, what Kirshner agreed to was that the Monkees would just be singers, and that was it. And he was not interested in bending at all on that. The Monkees were not musicians as far as Donnie was concerned, so they were not to be allowed to participate. And as I was saying earlier, this was important to Mike and Peter because they were working musicians. They wanted to have a career after the Monkees was done as working musicians, and they thought that the Monkees would allow them to do that. But the way Kirshner was running it meant that they wouldn't be allowed to do that, that they weren't going to be able to use it to advance their own careers. And so they started being difficult. For the most part, Mickey and Davey didn't really care one way or the other. They were happy to show up, deliver the lines, and cash the checks. But they eventually sided with Mike and Peter because it was important to Mike and Peter, and they were starting to become a band. They were starting to think of themselves as us against the world. And so they had solidarity with one another. And so as we close out 1966, the Monkees are doing well on TV. It's not a huge hit, but it's doing well. You know, it's making more money than it's losing, I would assume. The Monkees are doing well on TV. They're doing very well on the charts. The first, I've already mentioned Last Train to Clarksville, which was released back in August and hit #1 on the charts. Their second single, I'm a Believer, was released in November, also hit #1 on the charts. Their first album, The Monkees, was released in October, hit #1 on the charts. I mean, they were selling records hand over fist. Monkey Mania had swept the nation and had turned these four guys who just 6 months earlier were virtual unknowns. They are now A-list celebrities. Peter had a very nice deadpan reaction to this when he said in an interview once, "It was inconvenient to go out." So everything's looking up for the Monkees, but problems are on the horizon. And that's where we're leaving it this week. Next week, we will finish the story. In the meantime, I would appreciate it if you drop a comment down below. Tell me what you think. If you think I got something wrong, please let me know about that. I very much want to hear that. If you've got a different take on any of this stuff, drop that note down below. I always love hearing from you. And as always, I would appreciate it if you would click on the like button. Go ahead and click the subscribe button if you have not done so already. I would appreciate that. And if you do subscribe, click the bell for notifications. That would be nice as well. And again, thanks for watching. And I hope that the rest of your day is glorious. See you soon.